And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and these are the mono red staples that I am putting in my Commander decks. So if you're new to this series, basically I'm going through all the different color combinations, talking about the staples, the auto includes for me that I put in my decks. Of course, depending on color, that always matters. I refer to this as a template. And if you've watched my real-time deck building video, which I now have out, so now I can reference that video to help people to understand exactly what I'm talking about template. They're the building blocks that I start with depending on the color that I'm playing, and then I build from there. It just really speeds up the deck building process. For one, for someone like me that builds a ton of decks, that's really handy. Also, though, it helps to not forget the really important things that you don't want to miss out on, right? And red for me, I think, is probably the least staple color, if that makes any sense. There really isn't a ton. This is the smallest list that I've had so far. There isn't a whole lot of red cards, and you guys can think about it yourself. For anyone who plays a lot of red or mono red decks in particular, how many mono red cards do you actually auto include in all your decks? And I think part of the reason might have something to do with the fact that red a lot of times is all over the place with what they're doing. If you look at a lot of the top red commanders in the format, they are really all over the place. So this template is going to be small, but of course will change a lot depending on what your commander is doing. We'll start out with the removal, something that red is pretty darn good at, and you got to have those board wipes. I put Chain Reaction and Blasphemous Act in all of my mono red decks. I'm sure most people do. They're two of the best board wipes in the format. You could argue that Blasphemous Act is the best board wipe in the format. I mean, you know, you could argue that. If we're just talking about creatures, that's definitely a good argument to have. Chain Reaction is also a fantastic one. Typically, it's 4 mana to kill all creatures, which is good. I also really like Starstorm. That's a personal favorite of mine as well. Another one that you see quite a bit. I like the cycling, even though I maybe could count maybe 2 times that I actually cycled a Starstorm, right? You're usually going to want to use it. What I really like about it, though, is it's an instant. And the X can be troublesome at times. You know, you got to put a lot of mana into it if you want to kill those bigger creatures, but it can be great at sweeping the board, especially at instant speed. If your opponent just played an Avenger of Zendikar and they crack that fetch land, you can in response cast a Starstorm for 1. So I really like it there. Obviously, red kills artifacts really well, so Vandal Blast and By Force for me are auto includes in my mono red decks. Vandal Blast and auto include in any red deck. Even if I had a 5-color deck, Vandal Blast is going in there because it is the best artifact removal spell in the entire format. I don't know what's better. It's going to kill all your opponent's artifacts and it's not going to kill yours. Doesn't get much better than that, right? By Force is also a great one because now you're targeting, but you can just pick off as many as you want, right? If you got 2 artifacts on the table that you really want to get rid of, but you got a couple extra mana open, well, hey, why not throw that mana in there as well and knock off a couple of your opponent's mana rocks as well, right? Really great spell. Abrade is fast becoming one of my favorite removal spells in the entire format. I am really starting to put this in more and more decks. I did not used to have this in my Boros decks because white is great at removal, especially artifact removal, but man, I just love 2 mana instant, basically kill a creature. You know, it's got to have a toughness 3 or less, so dealing 3 damage to target creature is really handy in most games. And of course, destroying an artifact there's never a situation where that's not usable, right? So just a really great card. I love the modal aspect there. I always love modal on my removal. You find some prisoners, speaking of which, is another one that I've started to. I don't know if I would have called this an auto include for me, but I've really started leaning towards it. 1 on a red instant, and you can choose 1. Destroy target artifact, and again, you're never going to not want to do that. Also, though, you can exile the top 3 cards of target opponent's library. Choose one of them until end of your next turn. You may play that card, and you may spend mana of any color to cast it. I really like that ability a lot. It is a little bit, you know, if you're running out of ideas, you can take a card off the top of your opponent's library and maybe use it if it's going to be usable for you. But where this can be really great gotcha card is if your opponent tutors something to the top of their library, right, with one of those vampire tutor type of effects. After they shuffle and put it on top, you can cast this and exile it from the top of their library, so it can be great there as well. Really neat card. I really like Volcanic Offering as well. Talked about this a few times on my channel. Unfortunately, it's kind of an expensive card. You know, it never used to be, and I actually talked about this in one of my earlier 10 cards videos because it wasn't really used that much. It's become a little more popular. I think it needs to get another reprint. Yes, you are putting the choice in the hands of your opponents sometimes, but you're not going to ever hit any of your stuff. This is 5 mana instant speed. I kill one of my opponent's creatures because likely none of their creatures are going to have a toughness greater than 7. 7 damage is going to kill just about anything. And also I kill their best best non-basic land. You know, whoever's got the best one, whoever's got the Gaia's Cradle, the Cabal Coffers, whatever, I get rid of that. And then also you can do it in a political way where you get to pick who destroys the other creature and you get to pick who destroys the other land. It could be different people, right? So for me, usually when I cast this, if there's an Elesh Norn on the table, I pick another creature because I know the Elesh Norn's going to get targeted anyway, right? So don't waste your target. I also throw Lightning Bolt in all my mono red decks. I will throw it in a lot of other color combinations as well. It really is one of the most efficient removal spells in Magic's history. Just 1 mana to do 3 damage to any target is always going to be super handy. And of course, you absolutely have to have Chaos Warp in all your mono red decks. And again, probably a lot of other decks as well, but Chaos Warp is an absolute must include. It hits any permanent, right? I don't love the, shuffle and reveal a top card. And there has been times when they got something really good off the top. But for me, just the fact that Chaos Warp is really the only way to deal with enchantments in mono red makes it an auto include. I don't know how you could have a mono red deck without it. A couple of new cards that have become staples for me already. Fable of the Mirror Breaker, 2 in a red saga. Chapter 1, you create a 2/2 red Goblin Shaman creature token with, whenever this creature attacks, create a treasure token. That's great. You're getting a creature, which is good. Also, it's a Goblin and a Shaman, which are 2 great creature types in red. And when it attacks, you get to essentially ramp. That's pretty fantastic. It's usable in any deck. Chapter 2, you may discard 2 cards. If you do, draw that many cards. Again, usable in any deck, especially a lot of red themes. And then the 3rd chapter, you flip it and it becomes essentially a Kiki Jiki on the back, right? You can pay 1 and tap, create a token that's a copy of another target non-legendary creature you control, accept it as haste, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step, and we all know that ability is incredibly usable in every scenario. There's no deck that doesn't want to be doing that. So it really is a super versatile, super handy card that's doing so many different things. And I've realized very recently, like in the last few weeks, every deck that I make that has red, I want to be putting it in there, even if my deck isn't specifically doing any of these things, because it's doing so much, it fits in almost everything. And I'm gonna throw a brand new card in here from New Capenna, Professional Facebreaker, 2 in a red human warrior, 2/3 with menace. Whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. That's great. And you get the 1 treasure token, but it's also per player, which is something that I think I missed when I talked about this, or I didn't discuss anyway. If you attack 3 different players with this, and in a goblin deck or a lot of red decks out there, that's very easy to do, to connect with 3 different players. You're going to get 3 treasure tokens, and that in itself is really, really good. But on top of that, you can sacrifice those treasures to exile a top card of your library, and you may play that card this turn. So impulse draw on top of it. 2 things that red wants to be doing a lot. This card's going to go in a ton of decks. I'm hoping it's not going to be too expensive. It's definitely going to be a popular one in the format, and I think it's already like an auto include for me in red decks. Let's talk about the mana rocks, and Cursed Mirror is probably my favorite. If we're talking about red mana rocks, right? Most mana rocks are going to be colorless and go in any deck, but if we're talking specifically red, I love Cursed Mirror. I sort of gushed over it when C21 came out. I just did my C21 retrospective where I talked about it and how it wasn't really getting a lot of buzz when it came out. I thought it was great. It's very usable. It's even more popular than Monologue Tax, right? Monologue Tax was a card that was getting a lot of buzz when it came out in C21, and Cursed Mirror is actually in more decks than is Monologue Tax. It's just really handy. A 3 mana rock's not super great, but I love the ability. When it enters the battlefield, it becomes a copy of any creature on the battlefield until end of turn, and it gets haste. So you can just really get some fantastic moments with this card, and especially in a mono red deck, your opponent has a Rec Sage. You can copy the Rec Sage to kill an enchantment that you wouldn't normally be able to deal with. You can create an Eternal Witness, right? Any creature that has an ETB trigger, you can get the ETB trigger. Don't have to worry about the attacking part. Just get a really nice ETB trigger. There's almost always going to be a creature on the battlefield with that. Or best case scenario, your opponent's got a Blightsteel Colossus. You can copy their Blightsteel Colossus, swing with it and kill somebody. So really handy card. I love it. Of course, we got to have Arcane Signet. I really don't even need to mention this card. It just goes in every deck, I suppose. I also like Fire Diamond in my mono red decks. I typically use the Diamond series in my mono colored decks. Liquid Metal Torque and Worn Power Stone, those are sort of the auto includes for me in mono colored decks as well. Maybe with a few exceptions. Like green is always the exception here, because obviously I don't play a lot of mana rocks in green decks at all because it's not needed. Pretty much all of my other mono colored decks get Worn Power Stone and Liquid Metal Torque, and especially in mono red, Liquid Metal Torque is a must have. Again, because you have trouble dealing with enchantments in particular. Anything else though, like red deals with artifacts really, really well, right? I mentioned 4 cards in this video already that are dealing with artifacts really well, and this is just a great way to turn any permanent into an artifact and destroy it with some of your artifact removal, right? Again, with the by force, I'm going to destroy some stuff anyway. Why not turn their Rhystic Study into a artifact, and I'll hit that as well, right? Great card. And I even started putting Moonsilver Key in my red decks. And what I didn't realize about this card when I first talked about it in Midnight Hunt is, you know, you pay 1 and tap and sacrifice to search your library for an artifact card with a mana ability or a basic land, reveal it, right? So that's good. You know, having Land Dig in a red deck can be good because red doesn't ramp particularly well, but I can go get my Liquid Metal Torque with it. And Liquid Metal Torque is such a fantastic card in a mono red deck that having Moonsilver Key around to go get it is fantastic. You can also go get your Hedron Archive with it, right? And it can be pseudo card draw. Hedron Archive is another card that I play. You know, I used to put it in a lot of decks. I've actually stopped putting it in my mono white decks because, again, I think mono white actually draws cards pretty darn well. Mono red to me is the color that draws cards the worst in the format, in my opinion. So I still put Hedron Archive in my mono red decks, and I can go get it with my Moonsilver Key if I want to draw cards, right? Because I can play it. I mean, it's an expensive way to draw 2 cards, but it is an option for you. Of course, the just straight up ramp, Solemn Simulacrum, and Burnished Heart, as I've said before, go in all my monocolored decks that are not green. Just an auto include for me, Wayfarer's Bauble as well. Those 3 cards are absolute auto includes in any monocolored deck that isn't green for me. All right, let's talk about the lands, and we got to talk about Valakut Awakening, MDFC land that I have now been putting in all of my decks. Once again, there is some, you know, a lot of people will just shoehorn all the MDFC lands into all the decks that are available to them. I don't know. Like, some of the abilities just aren't very good. Valakut Awakening for me just has a very usable ability that you always want to be doing, and especially in a red deck where you can get a little stuck with some of the stuff in your hand that isn't very good at the time. Like, again, maybe you have a Vandal Blast and a by force and you don't need to be killing all those artifacts, so you can swap it out for something else. Just 2 in a red instant and put any number of cards from your hand on the bottom of your library and draw that many +1 is a really great ability that you're always going to be wanting to do in just about any deck. And then, of course, you can play it as a land if you get it earlier in the game. So for me, this has really become an auto include in my mono red decks. I also really like War Room in my mono red decks. You know, again, this is another card that you probably could put in any monocolored deck, particularly though in mono red decks, again, because I just don't think red draws cards very well. Red for me, especially now, is the color that struggles the most with card draw. So it's got to go in there. And I don't know how you don't put Valakut the Molten Pinnacle in there. I mean, I guess it's kind of an expensive card. Of all of the lands out there, like maybe Cabal Coffers in a black deck would be, you know, like how many lands out there are just so good in that monocolor that you can't not play them? Like, it's really tough to not, right? If I have a mono red deck, I'm going to put a Valakut Molten Pinnacle in there. It's just so fantastic. Late game especially, right? That's where it really comes in handy, because whenever a mountain enters the battlefield under your control, if you control at least 5 other mountains, you can deal 3 damage to any target. That's incredibly powerful. That is such a great ability. Has to go on a red deck for me. It really does. And that is about it. Yeah, that is only 25 cards that I talked about. There really isn't a lot there. And a lot of them were like ramp and mana rocks, like colorless cards. There's only actually 13 actual red cards that for me are sort of auto includes in decks. And a couple of them are brand new, right? So this is what I'm talking about. Like, I don't know. What am I missing? Am I missing something really great red card? I mean, Dockside Extortionist, I guess I should mention that. It's not an auto include for me. And I talked about this in my cards that I would ban video, which I just did, how, yeah, you could shoehorn Dockside Extortionist to any red deck. Obviously, it's a fantastic card. I just don't do that. I'm going to only put Dockside Extortionist in a deck where it really, really fits with what I'm doing. If I'm doing a treasure token theme, like a Gadrick deck, obviously I'm going to want to try to put it in there. Any deck like that. But for me, I don't put it in all my decks. I'm sure a lot of people do. We wouldn't be wrong to do so, right? But what else did I miss? What other mono red staples do you guys put in your mono red decks that I didn't talk about that are just auto includes for you, no matter what strategy you are using? Let me know in the comments below, but that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.